I am the Reverend Ann Barker, and I use she, her pronouns. Our musical prelude is performed by one of Westwood's many beloved musicians, Jennifer McMillan. The words will be on the screen if you wish to sing along at home. Jennifer will sing and play number 21 from our hymnal, Singing the Living Tradition, For the Beauty of the Earth. Before we play it, it's important to acknowledge that there's a simplistic gender binary in this song, in the phrase brother, sister, parent, child. And for us just to state clearly that we recognize the complexity of gender and appreciate the many identities expressed throughout humanity.
Hello, bonjour. The land where Westwood Unitarian Congregation is located and where many of us participating this afternoon are situated is Treaty 6 territory, land which is a traditional meeting ground and home for many indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. If you're joining us from other traditional lands, I invite you to name them in the chat. Land recognition is a tradition that is dated back for centuries for many indigenous peoples. Land recognition calls us to acknowledge our responsibility and to deepen our understanding of the history of this land and its peoples, to participate in and support the ongoing process of truth, reconciliation, and healing. I invite you to visit the Westwood Truth, Reconciliation, and Healing Resources page on our website for learning resources and actions each of us can take to further this process. We also welcome suggestions for additions or changes to this page. Tawau, bienvenue, welcome to Westwood Online and this CUC National Service. My name is Brenda Jackson. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the current president of Westwood Unitarian Congregation and your service leader this morning. Our musicians are Jennifer McMillan and Rebecca Patterson. Our service tech is Bill Lee, and our CUC hosts are the Reverend Julie Stoneberg and Vidya Ing. Our speaker this morning is our minister, the Reverend Ann Barker. A special welcome to Unitarian Universalists, friends, and newcomers joining us from across the country today. We hope you have time to stay after the service to visit and meet some people. Westwood is a compassionate Unitarian Universalist community of free religious thought. We invite you to question and explore your spiritual beliefs. We won't tell you what to believe. We welcome people of all genders, whomever you love, whatever your wealth or your education. In this community, reverence for the earth and belief in the dignity of every person inform our ethics. Music is an expression of our joy. Worship brings us together to celebrate what is important in our lives, and acts of justice are a symbol of our hope. We invite you to rest, grow, and serve the world.
Imagine, if you will, a full amber moon hanging over a glassy river. Indigo sky filled with sparks of light. Warm breeze rustling the emerald lawn so that each blade looks like a dancing spirit. You stand in the shadow of a castle-like hotel under a friendly canopy of majestic trees. Lush gardens burst with color, now muted in the midnight darkness, promising nature's rainbow when dawn arrives. Friendly benches line the riverside path, and there, as if burst from love's imagination, is the most delightful sculpture. Children with their limbs spread like starfish, linked to one another and forming an open dome. Moon shines, stars twinkle, river glistens, wind sings. Imagine knowing without a shadow of a doubt that you are home. If you have a candle or a chalice nearby, now is the time to bring it forward. At Westwood, when we don't have a chalice handy, we do this. We be the chalice, if only for a moment. So join with me now as each of us ignites our own live or symbolic fire. We think of the countless times that fire has been a beacon, a message of hope, a sign of warning, a promise of comfort or warmth or a shared meal. We light our chalices this afternoon in the spirit of unity, knowing that across this vast country and beyond our borders, humanity is united by the most basic of needs, and that nature, in its many manifestations, is essential to us all.
As in many Unitarian Universalist communities, Westwood has a tradition of making time each Sunday for people to light a candle and share a joy or concern in their lives. If you have a concern or sorrow, joy or celebration you would like to share, please take a moment to type it in the chat as we listen to Jennifer play. offer one last candle as a symbol of all the joys and concerns that remain in our hearts. Please join me as I read the affirmation, which is on the screen. May the light of these candles inspire us to use our power to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to serve the spirit of truth in loving affection and trusting hope. The Canadian Unitarian Council, through its small but dedicated staff, provides support for UUs and congregations across the country, fostering growth and outreach, particularly in the areas of lifespan religious education, spiritual growth, and social responsibility. Donations received today will be collected through the Canadian Unitarian Council and shared with Westwood. You have heard two pieces from the wonderful, talented Jennifer McMillan. And in a moment, Westwood's beloved choir director, Rebecca Patterson, will lead us in our offertory song, From You I Receive, to You I Give. As we have shifted to online services, I am profoundly grateful we've been able to continue to support local musicians and for the cooperation we've received in return. The music program is one of many programs offered by Westwood and supported by the generosity of our donors. Ways to donate are listed on the screen. Your support is genuinely appreciated.
From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live. From together I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this I live.
I was raised on the lower mainland of British Columbia, where the ocean and the mountains, the eagles and the salmon were almost commonplace. Almost, but not quite. With 4 seasons of green, our playground equipment was juicy with moss and lichen, deer grazed in our backyard, and frogs nestled into the flower pots on the sun deck. Ruby-throated hummingbirds flitted between hanging baskets of fuchsia and my brightly colored blouse on the clothesline. My memories are intimately bound up with that heavy, thick, gray ceiling that can make you pray for rain, the bright pitch of pine and the lingering pungence of cedar, tunneling through brambles the size of a house, scouring the vines for every last blackberry, and eating freshly chipped potatoes, boiled in oil and smothered with salt and malt vinegar out of greasy bundles of newsprint on the pier. As children, we made weapons from horse chestnuts and string or bulbous sea kelp. We skated on swampy vacant lots and thought everyone collected sand dollars and sea glass and mostly abandoned shells. Imagine my surprise when I discovered that the long, flat prairie is what makes my heart sing. That the sheet lightning and aurora borealis across a wide open sky were an entirely different kind of magic. That magpies were the most magnificent bird. That -40 could be a glisteningly beautiful experience, and that you could dress more easily for it than you could for rain. That experience that we imagined together at the chalice lighting time was my most poignant encounter with nature. To be filled beyond imagining with a profoundly visceral sense of home. On the banks of the South Saskatchewan River, in a prairie city that I had only just arrived to moments before. At Westwood, our theme this past year was drawing on our sources, where we explored and celebrated the 6 sources of Unitarian Universalism. We looked at them individually, what they have meant in our lived experience, and considered which ones were currently most essential to each of us. Kathleen Rollins writes in the Skinner House book, Sources of Our Faith, "Throughout history, we have moved to the rhythms of mystery and wonder, prophecy, wisdom, teachings from ancient and modern sources, and nature herself. These themes comprise the sources from which we draw strength and support. The sources are the ideas and deeds that reflect human experience, but they also point to that which lies beyond human understanding. They remind us that first and foremost, Unitarian Universalism is a religion rooted in the experience of the holy. They serve as a guide in determining what is valid, deep, and meaningful about living." Kathleen Rollins. As a theme, it was a blessing when the pandemic came into our lives. There we were, already deep into a study of what sustains us. Even if our spiritual practices were not already strong, or if our needs for support and sustenance changed as the world around us was changing, being immersed in a study of what is valid, deep, and meaningful in life was a gift. These are complicated times. We need sustaining practices, and we need to understand how spirit moves in our lives. Whether we are earth-centered and drawn to nature as the sixth source lifts up, or if we move through the world with a different identity, nature has always been a source of wisdom, strength, sustenance, and perspective for people. What we did this summer at Westwood was, instead of revisiting the sources one by one, we chose words from each of them and looked for the way those words are present not only in their original source, but throughout all of the sources. It was like a treasure hunt. Where within the six sources is mystery, is wonder, is reason, is God? We looked for all the ways justice and wisdom and spirit show up. Because if our six sources don't speak to each of the big themes, how truly useful are they? The pandemic is not the only crisis of our time, we all know that, but it amplified all of the crises. It changed our trajectories and sped up our timelines. Some of it painful, some of it brilliant. So now, as we grow into a greater understanding of anti-racism, of what a lived justice must be for all marginalized communities, as we learn to act towards a more fair ideal of beloved community, for these reasons, we also need to take a deeper look at our sources and ask, are these truly sustaining for all people? Because if they aren't, then we've slipped into a cultural pocket that doesn't value all people, a place where we have missed the mark of what beloved community is meant to be. We must ask ourselves with every choice we make about what it is to be a UU, would this Unitarian Universalist idea speak to someone who is denied a home, a job, or even a life because of their gender identity? Could this source be sustaining to someone who is targeted and endangered by structures of power? Will this practice be of value to someone who is hungry, is evacuated from a storm with no place to go, whose worksite presents a high risk of COVID infection, who is struggling with addiction? Because if our ideals, our visions, our dreams do not speak to the most vulnerable among us, then we're lost in an illusion that will expire with our wealth, with our democracy, and with our faith tradition. The beauty of the sources is that they come with history. They represent the very things that have sustained people throughout time. And they hold a deeper wisdom that gives us the knowledge to live out our principles in a more just world. Now, I must confess, I saved my favorite word of the Westwood summer services for this service because I wanted to be the one to share it. Today we ask, where is nature in the six Unitarian Universalist sources? We find it printed in the sixth source, spiritual teaching of earth-centered traditions which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. But nature is abundant throughout all 6 sources. I invite you, as I touch on just a few of the myriad ways that nature is wound through the sources like a nourishing vine, to look for your own examples, your own memories, and your own inspiration. I used to think that the first source was my greatest influence, the direct experience of transcending mystery and wonder, and the second, coming right behind it, the words and deeds of prophetic people. I used to believe that these were my sustaining sources above all others. So again, imagine my surprise when my Riverside experience in Saskatoon nearly 30 years ago now became one of the defining events of my life. You can argue that it was transcending mystery and wonder that called to me, or that the prophetic wisdom of Bill Epp, the sculptor, was the key. But without that whispering moon, that shimmering river, those dancing blades of grass, there would be no story. Because it turns out my call was to that land in that moment, that collision of atoms that supported my feet, that electricity in the air and the pull of the moon that drew me all the way into the story. I had never felt the call of a place before that day. And that's despite being raised in what many people think of as paradise. But we might react, what about the mystery? I mean, that was pretty mysterious. Indeed it was, and thus begins our spiral dance with nature, weaving through the sources. Because how many stories of transcending mystery and wonder take place in the natural world? It would be easier to count how many don't. One translation of the Quran tells us, "Behold, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, in the alternation of the night and the day, in the beasts of all kinds that he scatters throughout the earth, here indeed are signs for a people who are wise." Or our Unitarian faith leader, Emerson, "Our life is an apprenticeship to the truth that around every circle another can be drawn, that there is no end in nature, but every end is a beginning, and under every deep, a lower deep opens." Now, you might argue that the Quran is third source, the teaching of world religions, rather than the first source of mystery and wonder. But which world religions do not speak directly to the magnificence of nature as signs of the Creator's love for their people? Which religions do not mention sharing the bounty and blessings of harvest with one another or protecting one another in times of hardship or natural disaster? The magnificence of creation is woven freely through the tapestry of all religious teaching, in both celebration and warning, and as symbols of power, both terrifying and nourishing. And we could say that Emerson is teaching from the fourth source, that he's rooted in the Judeo-Christian tradition, or that he is second source, a prophetic voice of wisdom. Here's another UU minister from the 20th century, Gordon McKeeman. "For simple things that are not simple at all, for miracles of the common way, sunrise, sunset, seed time, harvest, hope, joy, ecstasy. For grace that turns our intentions into deeds, our compassion into helpfulness, our pain into mercy. For providence that sustains and supports our needs, we lift our hearts in thankfulness and pray only to be more aware and thus more alive. For simple things that are not simple at all. The gifts and mysteries of nature are at the heart of Judeo-Christian tradition." Theologian Martin Luther said that if you could understand a single grain of wheat, you would die of wonder. His words contain the wonder of the first source, prophetic wisdom of the second. He's the founder of the Lutheran faith, the fourth source, and reverence for the sixth, to celebrate that sacred circle of life. Gandhi said, "Nonviolence is like radium in its action. An infinitesimal quantity of it, embedded in a malignant growth, acts continuously, silently, and ceaselessly, till it has transformed the whole mass of a diseased tissue into a healthy one. Similarly, even a little of true nonviolence acts in a silent, subtle, unseen way, and leavens the whole society." Where shall we place that wisdom? Second source, for wisdom and a call to justice. First, for mystery, the power of such a tiny piece of an essential element. Third, because he was of the Hindu faith. Fifth, for a gem of science. And sixth, as honoring the power of natural substances. Can we separate nature from any of the sources? Can we draw clear lines between anything? Einstein wrote that the religion of the future will be a cosmic religion. It should transcend definitions of God and avoid dogmas and theology, covering both the natural and the spiritual. It should be based on a religious sense arising from the experience of all things as meaningful unity. I could argue for all six in this quote. I'm guessing by now you could too. How these words, this lesson provides sustaining wisdom from all directions, all of the sources. How much of the world's wisdom is inspired or impacted by the lessons or by the beauty of nature? Transcendentalist Margaret Fuller tells us that all around us lies what we neither understand nor use. Our capacities, our instincts for this present sphere are but half developed. Let us confine ourselves to that till the lesson be learned. Let us be completely natural before we trouble ourselves with the supernatural. I never see any of these things, but I long to get away and lie under a green tree and let the wind blow on me. There is marvel and charm enough in that for me. The reason and science of our humanist teachings is grounded in what is. The alchemy of chemistry and the power of physics, the realities of climate change, rather than the idolatries of an afterlife that might absolve us of responsibility and provide an eternal shelter. Author of Emergent Strategy, Adrienne Marie Brown, writes, "The whole is the mirror of the parts. Existence is fractal. The health of the cell is the health of the species and the planet." There are examples of emergence everywhere. Birds don't make a plan to migrate, raising resources to fund their way, packing for scarce times, mapping out their pit stops. They feel a call in their bodies that they must go, and they follow it, responding to each other, each bringing their adaptations. Responding to destiny together, emergence is beyond what the sum of its parts could even imagine. Our Judeo-Christian cornerstone makes frequent use of nature's trials to teach the most profound lessons. How will we each experience times of wandering and suffering? And the lesson is never resistance, but rather learning to open to what is. Catholic author Caretto wrote, "If you cannot go into the desert, you must nonetheless make some desert in your life, every now and then leaving and looking for solitude to restore in prolonged silence and prayer the stuff of your soul." We don't need to hold a Christian theology for that to make sense. It's the time of separation from the business of the world, back to nature, whether it's hiking a mountain or a silent retreat, a long drive on the open road, or hours spent tending the garden, where we hope to return to ourselves. How many of us have not experienced a time of suffering, of unknowing or indecision, that dark night or season when the world seems upended, when we're unsure what to do next? It seems to me that we are in a collective desert right now. The rhythms and gifts of nature are not only the domain of the earth-centered traditions. Of course, we know that, but our sixth source does have the gift of the most intentional focus on the sacred circle of the year. The spiral dance that leads us around and around the wheel of the year, revisiting seasons again and again. Seasons of inspiration, seasons of doubt, seasons of knowledge, seasons of prayer. I would suggest that nature is the source of all the sources, the fountain from which all sustenance springs. But then I have already confessed my bias. I'll close with the words of beloved Buddhist Thich Nhat Hanh. I like to walk alone on country paths, rice plants and wild grasses on both sides, putting each foot down on the earth in mindfulness, knowing that I walk on the wondrous earth. In such moments, existence is a miraculous and mysterious reality. People usually consider walking on water or in thin air a miracle, but I think the real miracle is not to walk either on water or in thin air, but to walk on earth. Every day we are engaged in a miracle which we don't even recognize. A blue sky, white clouds, green leaves, the black, curious eyes of a child, our own two eyes. All is a miracle. Blessed be, and amen.
Thank you, Anne. Please join us now and join Jennifer in the singing of the Earth Forever For the Earth Forever Turning, hymn number 163.
There are those surreal moments of fascination in our lives when the sky is a ridiculous pattern of orange and purple, or the golden light kisses the grain field in just such a way. When we think, if this were a painting, I would say this artist has a ridiculous imagination. Real life never looks like this, except when it does. Watch for those moments in your own life, and next time one happens, remember this. This is the sustaining power of nature to transcend what we believe to be true and the uncontainable magnificence of a greater possibility. Let's gather our candles and our hearts and minds. Together, we extinguish these small flames, opening the circle that bound us together for this hour. May you go out into the larger circle of the world, ready to support a higher truth, that we belong to one another, that we need one another, that we have the strength and the power to protect one another. May we make it so. Blessed.